911, Big 550 KTRS. Mark Fainaru and Steve Fainaru, Mark Fainaru-Wada and Steve Fainaru have co-written a book called League of Denial. It's in conjunction with a Frontline documentary, which is airing this week on PBS. The book is called League of Denial, the NFL Concussions, and the Battle for the Truth. Mark Fainaru-Wada and Steve Fainaru, let me hit the button here. Welcome, and welcome. Fainaru, welcome to Big 550 KTRS here in St. Louis. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning.
Morning.
Let's start with Mike Webster, who is the Steelers center from the 70s who was homeless. He was talked about in the 70s and the 80s, and people just thought he was something that was wrong with her. People just thought he was a drug addict. It turns out he had a brain injury caused through playing football.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Webster, of course, an icon in Pittsburgh, the anchor of the, those dynasties of the 70s. And when he gets out of the NFL, his family begins to notice real marked changes. Here's a guy who's very thoughtful, stable guy, financially secure from 17 years of playing football, who suddenly becomes a completely different person. And as you mentioned, he goes into sort of financial ruin. He ends up living out of his truck and in bus stations. He can't sleep because he's in so much pain, and he uses a stun gun to put himself to sleep. His descent into madness is chronicled, pretty extensively in our book League of Denial. And then he dies at the age of 50, and he's diagnosed with the first case of chronic brain damage in a former NFL player.
In the book League of Denial, you say that the doctor who discovered this then goes to the NFL and says what?
Well, Benedict Amalu is really an interesting character that we lay out a bunch in the book, and he's a Nigerian doctor who knows nothing about football. He grew up in Nigeria, has come to the States and become a incredibly well-educated doctor who happens to study Mike Webster's brain, and he believes that he's going to go to the NFL with these findings, and the league is going to embrace him. But really, two things happen. The first one is he and several of his colleagues, some of the top neuroscientists in the country, put together a paper describing what has happened to Webster and identifying the first case of CTE in a football player. And rather than the league embracing that, its research arm, the three leaders of it, go about attacking Amalu. They don't just publicly talk about how they question his findings, but rather they seek the retraction entirely of his paper, and that's an unheard of move. I mean, that usually happens only when someone has perpetrated a fraud or plagiarized. So there's this aggressive attack on Amalu. And then the other thing we describe in the book that's very interesting is when Amalu finally gets his findings in front of an actual NFL doctor, a longtime neuroscientist connected to the Pittsburgh Steelers, a neurosurgeon, this doctor says to Amalu, look, do you really understand the implications of this? And when Amalu says, well, tell me, the doctor says, even if only 10% of mothers in America believe that football is dangerous, that's the end of football as we know it.
The book is called League of Denial. Mark Fainaru-Wada and Steve Fainaru, investigative research on this. The NFL chose not to speak to you, correct?
That's right. We're both based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and we traveled to New York at the NFL's invitation to try to describe to them what we were doing. We wanted to be really as transparent and inclusive as we could about this and really engage the NFL because they had played such a huge role in the evolution of this issue, which had now become, a public health crisis. And, the NFL politely declined and did not cooperate with either the book or the film.
Now, we just heard recently that the NFL settled a class action lawsuit with all former players on brain injuries and all this. So shouldn't that decision clear up any problems going forward?
Well, I think there's two pieces to that. There's the issue of dealing with former players who are really struggling, and clearly some money is going to start to go to those guys once the settlement moves forward and happens, assuming everything gets ironed out. But the league remains, continues, and football overall has to deal with this lingering question, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what happened with the lawsuit. The lingering question that the league deals with, and then trickling down, I think, you're having this conversation. Parents and kids throughout the country are having this question now, which is, how dangerous is football? And I think our hope in doing the book was just to be as informative as possible so people could make sort of, informed decisions about exactly what are the implications for playing football. Does the repetitive nature of simply playing the game at these levels expose one to potential long-term brain damage? And how does one address that, not just at the NFL level, but again at the high school and the Pop Warner level?
There are studies now coming out that shows it isn't just NFL superstars. It's college, it's high school, it's Pop Warner, it's junior high kids who are on the junior high B team who get popped. They start to lose memory function the next couple of days in school. Correct?
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing is that, Mark and I, we lay out the trajectory of this issue in the book, not only from the NFL's perspective, but from the medical community's perspective. And one of the things that's really happened that I think is very important is that what's happening in the NFL is creating an enormous amount of attention around the country. And that attention is translating into research dollars and scrutiny, not only for NFL players, but for the millions of kids who play. And they're finding that a blow to the head associated with football has consequences. And I think that's, understanding that, getting to the bottom of what that means is going to it's really going to be an important thing in terms of understanding, sort of where we go forward in this sport that we all love, right? I mean, I think this is the thing that we love football. We watch football by the millions. Mark and I love football, and yet, this is something that has been discovered. It's a real thing. It's a hard thing for people to know, but it's something that I think we all need to get a handle on, so people can make good decisions about what they want to do with their kids and with themselves.
The book is called League of Denial. Since the book has come out, has the NFL said anything about this?
Well, it's interesting. The book is it's published on Tuesday, and we've heard nothing from the league. Although the one thing that did happen was that subsequent to excerpts running from the book in Sports Illustrated and in ESPN, Commissioner Goodell sent an email to 10 million fans laying out the NFL's efforts to make the game safer than ever. He didn't comment specifically on the book, but it was an interesting time that he chose to do that the day after these excerpts had been published.
Is there a way to make the NFL safe from brain injuries?
Well, I think this is the real issue that the league and that people who love football are facing. The leading expert on this issue, Ann McKee, who's a neuropathologist in Boston, she believes that this is a disease that's caused by the repetitive head trauma that's endemic to football. It's not a guy getting blown up or the concussions that we can necessarily see. It's the headbang that occurs on every play. And how do you eliminate that from football, where that is just part of the game? It's part of what we love about the game. And and so the NFL, which is now marketing itself, as Mark mentioned, is trying to make itself do that. Do you want to do that? I think we feel, if we have a role in any of this, it's just to provide information about how we got to this place, what the NFL has done to this point. And, it's a difficult situation. It's a sport that we all love. And, how can you make it safer? I think it's a real question, and I don't think that question has been even remotely answered.
Is the NFL going to look very different 5 years from now?
Again, I don't think we know. And do you want it to look different? I think that's another sort of fundamental question. I mean, as Steve was saying, this is what the game is, and it's more about, are you going to inform people and players to what they're facing, and then let them make those decisions. How much really can you change it? Without making draconian changes that will in fact alter the game in ways that maybe people don't embrace it in the way they do. Does the league want to do that? Does the league need to do that? I don't think those are answers that any of us have, or I don't think Steve or I are trying to direct the league in what it should do. We love the game, and we just want to make sure people are informed as much as possible.
That's Mark Fainaru-Wada, Steve Fainaru. The book is called League of Denial. It's also part of a Frontline documentary that airs on PBS this week. Gentlemen, great work. Congratulations on this book, and we'll talk to you down the road.
Great. Thank
Sounds
you.
Great. Thank you.
You got it. The book is League of Denial. Mark Fainaru-Wada, Steve Fainaru. They're the guys who wrote the Barry Bonds book, Game of Shadow, or the Barry Bonds book. What was the name of that book? That was the one that busted him for all that stuff, got him into so much trouble. Anyway, they're now out with this book called League of Denial, The NFL, Concussions, and the Battle for the Truth. They talked about Mike Webster, Junior Seau ended up killing himself, and Dave Duerson, who went to Notre Dame, played for the Chicago Bears, shot himself in the chest, and left a note saying, "Please, when you find my body, donate my brain to science because there's something wrong with me." It makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up with what's going on with football, concussions, not just for the superstar, but for the college kid, the high school kid, all the way down to junior high and Pop Warner.